साथियों, एक बार फिर आप सबका बहुत-बहुत स्वागत है हमारे इस अलीगढ़ सोसाइटी ऑफ हिस्ट्री एंड आर्कियोलॉजी आशा और गंगा जमनी के ऑनलाइन सीरीज। जैसा कि आप सब जो हमारे प्रोग्राम से जुड़े रहे हैं, आप सब जानते हैं हमारी कोशिश है कि हम आप तक इतिहास को, तारीख को और उसके उन पहलुओं, उन पन्नों पर हम ज़्यादा रोशनी डालें, उनको उजागर करें जो तथ्य पे, एविडेंस पे आधारित हो। पहले सीजन में हमारे ज़्यादातर प्रोग्राम्स, चाहे वो लेक्चर्स रहे हों या डिस्कशंस, वो मिडिवल इंडिया, मध्यकालीन भारत से ताल्लुक रखते थे। लेकिन इस सीजन में हमने आधुनिक भारत को भी शामिल किया है। हमारे कई प्रोग्राम्स गांधी जी और सर सैयद अहमद खान को लेकर भी हुए। आगे चलकर हम प्राचीन काल, एंशिएंट इंडिया को भी टच करेंगे। आज हम एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट एस्पेक्ट पर एक बहुत जाने माने इतिहासकार को सुनने जा रहे हैं, और हमारा मौजू है हमारा राष्ट्रीय आंदोलन और सांप्रदायिकता का प्रश्न, द नेशनल मूवमेंट एंड द कम्युनल क्वेश्चन। हमारे साथ हैं एक ऐसे इतिहासकार जिन्होंने हमारे राष्ट्रीय आंदोलन को पास से देखा था और हिस्सा भी लिया था। स्वागत है प्रख्यात इतिहासकार प्रोफेसर इरफान हबीब साहब का। इनके वालिद भी न सिर्फ एक हिस्टोरियन थे, वो भी एक बुलंद पाए के नेशनलिस्ट थे, जिनके घर पर गांधी जी और नेहरू जी जैसे राष्ट्रीय आंदोलन से जुड़े लोग अतिथि बनकर आते थे। जब राष्ट्रीय आंदोलन चल रहा था और सांप्रदायिकता सर उठा रही थी, तब टू बी एग्जैक्ट इन 1927 प्रोफेसर मोहम्मद हबीब साहब ने एक किताब लिखी थी, सुल्तान महमूद ऑफ गजना, जो इस बढ़ती हुई सांप्रदायिकता का एक जवाब थी। और आज भी वो किताब हमारे लिए एक मशाले राह है। प्रोफेसर इरफान हबीब किसी इंट्रोडक्शन के मोहताज नहीं है। पद्म भूषण और प्रोफेसर एमेरिटस इरफान हबीब साहब का नाम ही काफी है। He is the doyen of Indian historians, and along with such names as Romila Thapar, R.S. Sharma, Bipan Chandra, and Satish Chandra, his is the most revered name amongst the historians around the world. But simultaneously, it is one of the most feared names amongst the communalists of both varieties and shades, the Hindutva and the Islamic fundamentalists. हमारे इस प्रोग्राम में भी वो कई बार शामिल हो चुके हैं। इनफैक्ट पिछले साल हमारे ये ऑनलाइन लेक्चर्स इनकी ही एक किताब के डिस्कशन से शुरू हुई थी। To me personally, he is more than a teacher, a guru in fact, a father figure who trained me and shaped me. पिछले कुछ सालों से राष्ट्रवाद का मुद्दा एक हथियार की तरह इस्तेमाल किया जा रहा है और साथ में एक धर्म विशेष के और उससे जुड़े उससे जोड़ा जा रहा है और एक दूसरे धर्म विशेष को प्रताड़ित किया जा रहा है। चलिए आज प्रोफेसर हबीब साहब से हम सुनेंगे कि राष्ट्रीय आंदोलन में सांप्रदायिकता का आखिर क्या मुद्दा था और सांप्रदायिक ताकतों ने राष्ट्रीय आंदोलन में क्या किरदार निभाया। I leave it to Professor Irfan Habib Saab to deliver his lecture in any of the languages which he prefers. He may also mix his lecture into Hindustani and English if he so wishes. Let us hear Professor Irfan Habib Saab, sir. Please. Welcome, sir.
Friends, members of Asha and Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb organizations. Professor Riz's remarks make it very difficult for me now to compose my address, because after his words, you would be expecting such words of wisdom as I don't possess. But in any case, I shall now try my best to address the subject that has been set for me, and that is the national movement and the communal problem. The normal date given to the rise of the national movement is 1885, when the first session of the Indian National Congress was held at Bombay. Fewer than 100 people attended it, but this ambition was from the beginning to have an all India organization. Already there was a consciousness that the Indian nation, the concept of Indian nation, involved the inclusion of various religious communities. The founders of the Indian National Congress, including Ellen Octavian Hume, who had then devoted his life to the cause of the Indian people. To them, it was very important that the Congress should represent all the religious communities, not simply the majority. And therefore, while lawyer Mr. W.C. Banerjee was the first president of the Congress, the next president, Dadabhai Naoroji, was a Parsi. And the third president was Badruddin Tayyabji, a Muslim. So by its very choice of succession of presidents, the founders of the Congress wanted to indicate that it was an organization which was dedicating itself to the national cause and therefore the cause of all communities. Clearly, the majority of the Indian people being Hindus, it was clear that if the Congress had to expand, it would have a very large number of Hindus along with a smaller number of Muslims and a small number of communities like Parsis and Christians and Sikhs. That situation, one should understand, would be one which would be in all organizations, open to all communities, not only a nationalist organization in India. Nevertheless, the Congress from the very beginning tried to make an appeal to all communities to join the national cause. Even it's in earlier pamphlets, it tried to convey this message. For instance, in one pamphlet, which was issued in English, there's a conversation between two villagers about how life is difficult under the British government. The two villagers are Fariduddin and Rambakhsh, and they belong to a village called Kambakhpur, an unfortunate village. You can see here the attempt to address grievances of all sections of the population. Unfortunately, two things happened. One was that one section of the Congress, which came to be called extremists, led by the great Bal Gangadhar Tilak, began to appeal directly more and more to the Hindu sentiments, notably exalting Shivaji in his struggle against Muslim powers, both the Adil Shah and Aurangzeb, justifying even the murder that he committed of an Adil Shahi noble. Naturally, therefore, there was a difficult situation posed for those who were not Hindus, as far as Congress work was concerned, and therefore the leadership of the Congress, which was in the hands of the moderates at that time, took a firm position against the extremists, not only because the so-called extremists were vigorous nationalists, insisting on stronger opposition to the British government, but also because they raised the communal question within the national movement. And while one recognizes the greatness of Tilak, one also must recognize the problem he then posed for the national movement. Because he had also similar nationalist leaders in other parts of the country, notably Lala Lajpat Rai, for instance, in Punjab. Vigorous nationalists, but unfortunately also Hindu communalists in many of their approaches. On the other hand, there was a Muslim opposition based also on purely communal grounds. It was particularly represented by a very intemperate speech by Sayyid Ahmad Khan, Sir Sayyid, who was not naib at that time, but was made a naib 3 days later after his speech. This speech was made at Lucknow and directed entirely against the Congress, raising both communal and regional issues. Regional in that he attacked Bengalis and said that the Congress wanted to replace the British with Bengalis. And secondly, raising the religious issue. And therefore trying to combine both Rajput opposition, for instance, Thakurs and so on, UP Hindu Zamidars against the Congress as a Bengali party, and also Muslim opinion, openly taking a communal position, both a casteist and a communal position at the same time. And therefore, from the very beginning, Indian nationalism had to face these two communal things. And this continued, unfortunately, for a very long time. The so-called moderates, particularly led by Gokhale, are to be commended for their position, I think balanced and wise position as far as the communal question is concerned. But they had a difficult position, attacked on one side by the extremists, who correctly, I think, criticized the compromising positions that the moderates often took as far as the British government was concerned. But on the other hand, while doing so, raised the communal issue. And then he was faced by increasing opposition from Muslim quarters. In 1906, for example, Muslim notables met the Viceroy, Lord Minto, at Shimla and pressed him either not to go on with any legislative reforms, or if these reforms had to be put in position, then the Muslim gentry and Muslim higher classes should get a much larger share than they would by going by the population of Muslims, which was a quarter of the total population. And therefore, from 1906 also, the Muslim League was organized. And in its earlier sessions, it not only praised the partition of Bengal of 1905, but also expressed its satisfaction with the present government, even if there were no further reforms. The situation changed, however, as a large number of entrants into the Muslim middle class realized that Britain, the British government, was a common enemy. And this was further accentuated, this feeling, by British imperialism attack, directly and indirect attack on the interests of the Ottoman Empire, the Turkish state, which several Muslims now recognized to be the leading Muslim power, and particularly recognizing the position of the Ottoman ruler as a Khalifa, in the sense of his being the protector of the holiest places of Islam, whether Sunni or Shia, which were within the Ottoman possessions. Therefore, curiously, the religious matter drove Muslim radicals to Indian nationalism. They saw the pan-Islamic ideology, which was developing at that time, as an anti-imperialist ideology, and therefore an anti-British ideology. And in fact, Jamaluddin Afghani's proponent had asked Indian Muslim youth to join their Hindu compatriots in opposition to the British government in a lecture at Calcutta, after which he was externed again from India. So this again brought a situation in which what one might be called a Hindu-Muslim rapprochement under the nationalist auspices became possible, and came in 1911, when the British government cancelled its partition of Bengal and created a separate province of Bengal, which had been demanded by the Congress. And while this province technically had a Muslim majority, thin Muslim majority, it became clear that the promises of the British government to Muslim communalists were not unshakable. And therefore, it led to along with the question of Turkey, it led to the rapprochement between the Muslim League and the Congress. I think that Tilak, returning from his long imprisonment in Burma, also realized that if Indian nationalism had to become stronger, it cannot simply be a spokesman for Hindu radicals. And therefore, Tilak altered his policy considerably, made overtures to the Muslim League, and was the main figure in the Lucknow Pact of 1916, in which the Congress agreed to support separate electors for Muslims, giving Muslims proportionately larger number of shares where Muslims were a minority, but also reducing Muslim share in separate communal electorates in the Muslim majority province of Bengal, where with a population of over 50%, Muslims got only 40% seats under the Lucknow Pact. In other words, where Muslims were in a minority, they gained. Where they were in a majority, they either didn't gain, as in Punjab 50%, or they lost, according to this proposal. But this was an accommodation from both sides. For instance, in UP, with a population barely of 15%, the Muslims got 30% seats under this pact. Now, this pact, by committing the Congress to separate communal electorates, created a problem later on, which until 1940 remained the major issue in the communal scene. How much seats in legislature Muslims would get. There were other issues on which riots occurred, music before mosques on which Muslims protested, cow slaughter on which Hindus protested. But there was now also a man on the scene who would soon dominate Indian politics. That was Mohan Karamchand Gandhi, coming from South Africa and arriving in India in 1950. Already in South Africa, he did a book, Hind Swaraj, 1909. There were many problems with Hind Swaraj because it did not prescribe any program for economic development and economic welfare of the Indian people. But as far as the communal question was concerned, it was very clear. India was a land of both Hindus and Muslims and other communities. And whenever he talked of religious education, he talked not only of Pandits but also of Maulvis. They would get correct education. When he talked of what was good under Hindu rulers, he made it a point also to speak about Muslim Bashas. In other words, and in fact, he criticized those Hindu leaders who were criticizing the Reform Act of 1909 on the ground that Muslims had got a larger share of the legislature, 8 seats out of 27, than justified by their population. And since they were also, many Muslims were voters in the general constituencies, 3 Muslims were elected from the general constituencies, so they had 10 or 11 seats out of 27, much larger than their population. Gandhi severely criticized this kind of opposition by the Hindu opposition to the 1909 Act. And he said anything given to Muslims and Muslim brothers should be welcomed by Hindus. So this was the background with which Gandhi came to India. And he made it very clear by the way in which all the time he demanded the release of Maulana Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali. Then he also supported the Muslim movement, Muslim opposition to the reduction of Turkey as a subordinate power and the assault thereby on the Khilafah. Actually, the Khilafat movement, although anti-British, was a purely religious issue. And it says much for the dominance exercised by Mahatma Gandhi that almost the entire Congress, including uh, uh, leaders who belong to the Hindu Mahasabha, which was now being founded, Malaviya ji and Lala Lajpat Rai, they were also brought into this movement, which was not only for Swaraj, but also for the protection of the Khilafah. And therefore, this movement, which began in 1920, was a movement in which both communities participated. Congress, Muslim League, and Khilafat committee sessions were held together at the same time in the same places. That kind of unity was not on display any time later. The difficulty, of course, was that Khilafat was an institution the Turks did not want. And when the Khilafat itself was abolished by Turkey in 1924, then, and much before that, when Turks themselves made it clear that they were not in favor of Khilafat as an institution, then the movement lost much of its representative. And already, of course, before that, because of what had happened in Chauri Chaura in 1922, the non-cooperation movement had to be withdrawn. But clearly, Chauri Chaura on the one hand, the Khilafat fiasco on the other, undid a unified struggle which had been undertaken by the national movement. And thereafter, the communal question greatly affected the Indian political life in two ways, or in two stages. Firstly, the whole issue seemed to be about not really cow slaughter or music before mosques. These were issues to be raised whenever you wanted, for other reasons, to intensify intercommunal disputes. But the major issue remained about Muslim representation in legislative bodies. On the one hand, the argument was that since the nationalists now wanted total suffrage, all adults, men and women, to vote, therefore, Muslims, wherever they would be in majority, would get their representation according to their population. However, this raised two difficulties. On the one hand, especially in the Punjab, this was not accepted. Hindus and Sikhs demanded separate electorates. And they wanted, because they were minority, and particularly in the Punjabi speaking areas, the Muslim majority was considerable. And therefore they felt that in the Punjabi speaking areas, which means modern Indian state of Punjab and the Pakistan province of Punjab, if you combine the two, then if there was just ordinary voting in this area, Hindus and Sikhs would hardly get any representation, and Muslims would hardly get any representation in what was Haryana, if voting went by religious denominations. And therefore, there was this particular difficulty even for Hindu majoritarians, Hindu Mahasabha. And then there was the further difficulty that where Muslims were in a minority like UP or Bombay, if voting was to be done, was to go by religion, then hardly any Muslims would get elected. As we can see today, for example, how few Muslims get elected, have got elected to the UP Legislative Assembly, far lower than their population percentage. So clearly, there was these difficulties which could be arranged, which would be eliminated only by proportional representation, which at that time no one thought being to be practical. And therefore, there was a real issue as far as communal representation was concerned. Now, the Congress wished to respond to it by their decision. I will not go into details about the Nehru Committee and so forth, because the Nehru Committee evolved a formula which was later on recognized by the Congress. So certainly this is worth mentioning. In its 1928 all parties report, it demanded that there should be total universal suffrage, all adults to vote, but minorities to be protected by having particular constituencies marked only for minority candidates, Muslims in particular. Sikhs were excluded, they were not thought of, but they were later on considered by the Congress. And this particular principle was adopted by the Congress in July 1931. Now, for the moment, even the Muslim League accepted this, and the quarrel was not about the principle itself, but about about whether the Muslim representation should be according to population. It was considered that it could be more than according to population in minority areas. But how much more? And the Muslim League demand was that in Bengal and Punjab, the proportion should be the same as by population, so that Hindu and Sikh minorities would not get more than their share by the population. But wherever Muslims were in a minority in other provinces, they should get more than their share in the population. Now, clearly, this was illogical. So that even though there would be joint electorates, Muslims wanted that their candidates, Muslim candidates, should be elected from a larger number of seats. In that case, there could be, for instance, in one constituency, 3 Muslim candidates. And so that was not, in other constituencies, there would be only Hindu candidates. Technically, Muslims could also stand from there. So this was the main solution, which only the dispute was whether Muslims would be allotted seats with joint electorates according to their populations, How much more than their population? If more than their population, how much? And what about Hindu and Sikh minorities in Bengal and Punjab? These were the main problems. And in July 1931, Congress accepted this principle. But the disputes over Muslim representation in the communities was heightened by the British insistence on separate electorates, which ultimately came in the British Prime Minister's communal award in 1934. Now, henceforth, the Muslim League demanded separate electorates. And the Congress position was that they preferred joint electorates. But so long as there was no agreement with the Muslim League on the issue, they would continue with, they would not demand the revocation of the separate electorates. Now, this position was totally unacceptable to the Hindu Mahasabha. And therefore, in 1934, Malaviya and Ani resigned from the Congress, and henceforth, actually, the Congress said that its members could not belong to communal organizations. In other words, it began to close its doors to members of the Hindu Mahasabha as well as Muslims. On the whole, this was a very accommodating position. And clearly, this would have continued if the demand for Pakistan had not come. If the Muslim communist demand had remained for separate electorates, even in higher proportion to the Muslim population, as by the communal award of the British Prime Minister in 1934, then the Congress would be totally, who had been in practice agreeable to it. And therefore, this issue was hardly one on which Muslim League could oppose the Congress. And therefore, actually, Muslim League and Congress came fairly close together in the 1937 election. Unfortunately, Congress put up very few Muslim candidates. It's an astonishing thing that the Congress itself voluntarily seemingly retreated from the Muslim constituency. Out of 482 Muslim constituencies, it set up only 26 candidates. It was almost a self-withdrawal and left the battle to the Muslim League, so that often enough, in Congress meetings, indirectly, support was also extended to the Muslim League candidates. But unfortunately, when provincial governments were formed, particularly where Muslim League had made a better showing, in the Muslim constituencies, although its showing overall was very poor. Not even a quarter of the Muslim vote went to the Muslim League, but much better than the Congress. It did not admit Muslim League into coalition governments in UP and Bombay. In Bombay, the appeal request was summarily rejected, and in UP, the demand that Muslim League members must obey the Congress discipline meant that no coalition ministry could be formed. This was very unfortunate. In Bombay, I think the blame rested with Mahatma Ji himself, Gandhi Ji, and in UP it rested with Pandit Nehru. This was a very unfortunate decision. And the decision meant that in order to survive, Muslim League went now all out to denounce Congress governments as Hindu Raj. And from here began a new communal battle in which often the British seemed forgotten and the Muslim League actually seemed to accept British regime so long as it was not Hindu Raj. The difficulty for the Muslim League, of course, was that while they could raise communal issues all the time in Congress governed states, which were not even accepted by the British government, those complaints. But they didn't have any cause to pursue in the provinces of Bengal and Punjab. And therefore came the issue of Pakistan. Now here it must be said that on the Hindu side, Savarkar had always been speaking of two nations from the time that after his apologies he got released. He was released in 1924 under conditions. These conditions were that he could not open his mouth against the British, and therefore he began denouncing the Muslims and raised the issue of Hindutva, which is today the official doctrine of the Indian government, current Indian government. And Golwalkar wrote his book, Our Nation Defined, in which he said that Muslims would not have any citizen rights. So that actually a two-nation theory was already created by Savarkar and the RSS. Whatever the Congress, BJP or Savarkar may say now, but they are Golwalkar writing in 1938 that Muslims can't even be citizens, they won't have any rights. Now, I'm not saying that in raising the Pakistan demand, the Muslim League had these threats in mind, because Savarkar and Golwalkar were almost nobodies with after Savarkar's apologies to the government in 1939. Whatever they said would not be made an excuse for the Pakistan resolution. It certainly means that Savarkar and Golwalkar's followers today should keep their mouths shut on this issue, because they themselves were the authors of the two-nation theory, but that is another matter. And from then on, the position became very difficult for the Congress from the Lahore resolution of the Muslim League in 1940. But although the name of Pakistan was not taken, and in fact, two states were visualized, as in fact have come to pass today under the name of Pakistan and Bangladesh, not one state. And then by mere statements, Jinnah consolidated the demand for Pakistan into one state, having Bengal and Assam on one side, and Punjab, Sindh, and Northwest Frontier Province and Kashmir on the other, and Baluchistan. So, and giving it one name, Pakistan. Now, the Congress continued to work for a compromise. Gandhiji, on his release in 1944, called on Jinnah, went to Jinnah's house, but Jinnah was extremely discourteous in his responses. And therefore, Congress could hardly be blamed for the lack of agreement with the Muslim League. Gandhi was intent on giving all concessions to the Muslim League except the division of the country. But this could not be obtained. I must also say, however, that when communal rioting began, the riots in Bengal were actually totally put in the shade by the slaughter in Bihar, which had a Congress government in 1946. And Gandhiji went there and had the Muslim Relief Fund. But nobody could destroy this slaughter Muslims on such a scale. And then, of course, then Patel's speech in Meerut, sword will be met by sword, which greatly disturbed Gandhi and everyone else. The Congress leader said he was in a Congress session that he thought he was attending a Hindu Mahatma session. So clearly, this kind of language played into the hands of the Muslims. But there were other steps also. When the great slaughter took place after partition, on both sides, where according to one estimate 500,000, the lower estimate 200,000 were killed on both sides. Can you imagine that? It's horrible to think that so many people got away with murder. Banning the RSS after Gandhiji's murder was hardly enough. Nobody in the RSS was punished. Nobody in the Muslim National Guard was punished. So unfortunately, the history of fighting, struggling against communism is a very tragic history. And when we come to the end of it, shouldn't we take a determined decision that we will not get into that quagmire again? And that is why all citizens of India today should be careful about talk about Hindutva and denunciations of minorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Irfan Habib, for giving us the details of how this communal virus kept on growing over a period of time. What you have been trying to say in your lecture, uh, Savarkar and Govalkar were actually, as you rightly pointed out, quite insignificant. And they could not be taken as an excuse for the demand of partition. You also pointed out that to a large extent, the Congress also was hardly to be blamed. Most of its leaders, including Nehru and Gandhi, uh, remained uh, away from this, you know, communal demand which was being put up before us for the division. But you also pointed out certain speeches of leaders like Patel at certain points of time, which did add some, ignited some more fire to the communal question which was developing during that period of time. ये जो आपका एक्सपोजिशन था, जो आपका पूरा एक शुरू से किस तरीके से मुस्लिम लीग के लीडर्स की किस टाइप से डिमांड्स डेवलप हुई और अल्टीमेटली पार्टीशन और फिर पार्टीशन राइट्स, आई थिंक दीज आर द थिंग्स which we have to be reminded of again and again. क्योंकि इसी जो डिटेल्स हैं उसी में एक आंसर भी मौजूद है कि आज जो दोबारा से वो ताकतें उभर रही हैं, उस टाइप के कम्युनल क्वेश्चंस उभर रहे हैं, जो एक कम्युनल डिवाइड दोबारा कंट्री में देखी जा रही है, उससे कैसे निपटा जाए. Before I start taking up a large number of questions which have been asked to you today, my only question to you would be कि सर जो इस पूरे पीरियड में 20th सेंचुरी के शुरू में जो डेवलपमेंट जिनके बारे में आपने जिक्र किया, अगर उनको हम याद रखें तो उनसे आज 21st सेंचुरी में जब हम दोबारा से एक कम्युनल फोर्सेस से डील कर रहे हैं, हमारे लिए क्या सबक है और उससे हम कैसे अपने को आज संभाल सकते हैं या क्या कर सकते हैं. इफ यू कैन जस्ट briefly tell us about what we today's Indians should take from the developments which you talked about.
Well, I am unfortunately a historian. I deal with the past. I am only a normal, ordinary citizen as far as contemporary times are concerned. But clearly, the kind of ideology which is now being promoted by first running down the national movement, by totally ignoring its message, and by raising the communal and religious issue all the time, from changing place names to running down the Muslim religion in particular, interfering with namaz in Haryana. These issues are not ordinary events. They suggest a totally diseased mind in the administration, which one had never seen before. At least I was 16 at the time of independence, 47. I can't remember such events in the previous century. These are totally new developments. And therefore, all thoughtful citizens in India should consider where the country is going. And the only way citizens can act is to cast their votes. Surely, all of us should wake up as to what is happening in the country.
सर इसी से जुड़ा हुआ एक और छोटा सा एक आपसे सवाल है, और वो ये कि आजकल एक अटेम्प्ट और चल रही है, और वो ये कि जो अब तक पिछले 70 साल से जो हमें हिस्ट्री पढ़ाई गई, वो एक पर्टिकुलर ओरिएंटेशन की थी, बहुत सेलेक्टिव थी, एक खास नुक्ता नज़र था जो पेश किया गया। हमने गांधी जी की तो बात की, हमने नेहरू जी की तो बात की, लेकिन बहुत से और ऐसे फ्रीडम फाइटर्स थे जिन्होंने अलग अलग हिंदुस्तान के सूबाजात में या टेरिटरीज में हिस्सा लिया, लेकिन हमने उनको भुला दिया और उनका कभी जिक्र नहीं करते, और आउट ऑफ कॉन्टेक्स्ट, आउट ऑफ द वे जाके हम गांधी जी और नेहरू जी और कुछ लोगों को हाईलाइट करते हैं। ये एक तरीके से एक चीज है जो डेवलप की जा रही है, इस पे आपका क्या रिएक्शन?
नहीं, ये जो बात कही जा रही है तो बेवकूफ़ी की है, क्योंकि जब भी आप हिस्ट्री लिखते हैं तो आप सब लोगों के एक एनसाइक्लोपीडिया तो नहीं बना सकते कि उनके नाम दे दिया जाए। जो अहम लोग होते हैं, महत्वपूर्ण होते हैं, उन्हीं का जिक्र किया जाता। तो सावरकर का कैसे जिक्र करें? जिक्र तो करते ही हैं कि वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस थी, लिखी इन्होंने तगदर पर। उसके बाद इन्होंने जो माफी मांगी और उसके बाद वो सिर्फ मुसलमानों पर अटैक किया, तो उसमें क्या चीज ऐसी है जो जिसका जिक्र हिस्ट्री में किया जाए? क्या उन्होंने खास बात की 1924 के बाद? अंग्रेजों का तो कोई क्रिटिसिज्म नहीं किया, तो कैसे वो नेशनल मूवमेंट के बड़े फिगर्स में उनका जिक्र हो? और फिर मैं ये भी कहना चाहता हूँ कि गांधी जी के मर्डर में भी उनका हाथ कोई मालूम ही होता है। जाहिर है कि जो लॉ की मेजर्स हैं उनमें वो मर्डर में शामिल नहीं थे, लेकिन हिस्ट्री की जो एविडेंस होती है उसमें तो साफ ही उनका मर्डर में हाथ। तो ये चीजें जो कही जा रही हैं कि फना का जिक्र नहीं किया, फना का जिक्र नहीं किया, फना का जिक्र नहीं किया, तो बेवकूफ़ी की बात है, क्योंकि जो कांग्रेसी के लोग थे जितने जेल में गए, तो क्या आप सबका जिक्र करेंगे? बहुत से लोगों का जिनका जिक्र ये किया जाता है उन्होंने इतना किया, उन्होंने तो कुछ भी नहीं किया। तो हर एक का जिक्र तो हिस्ट्री में नहीं हो सकता, दुनिया के किसी मुल्क में नहीं हो सकता। आप कोई डिक्शनरी ऑफ फाइटर्स तो नहीं बना रहे। तो उन्हीं का जिक्र होगा हिस्ट्री में, उन इंडिविजुअल्स का जिनकी राइटिंग या जिनके एक्शंस से असर पड़ा मुल्क। और इसलिए बिल्कुल सही था 1947 के बाद, क्या 1947 से पहले भी उसी किस्म की हिस्ट्री लिखी जा रही थी। अब ताराचंद की हिस्ट्री ऑफ इंडियन पीपल देख लीजिए, तो कोई ऐसी बात नहीं हुई। अब जरूर है कि अब आप हिस्ट्री ऐसी लिखेंगे जिसमें अकबर का नाम न लिया जाए, अकबर को आप हिस्ट्री से निकाल दें, आप ये कहें कि कास्ट सिस्टम मिडिएवल टाइम्स में आया, ये सिलेबस में लिख दिया जाए, बिल्कुल बेवकूफ़ी की बात। तो ये तो हिस्ट्री नहीं है जो यूजीसी ने जैसे प्रेस्क्राइब की है, जाहिर है कि मॉडर्न रेजीम के प्रेशर। ये तो हिस्ट्री नहीं है, ये तो एक माइथोलॉजी है, और बहुत ही डेंजरस माइथोलॉजी।
Right, sir. I mean, one last point from my side, sir, and that is that you also touched Sir Syed Ahmad Khan while you were delivering your lecture. Uh, in recent years, certain books have come out, both from India and Pakistan. For example, very recently, there is a book by Sikandar Hayat on leadership Odyssey, Muslim separatism and achievement of separate state of Pakistan. Uh, after going through such works, it appears as if, the entire onus of the communal divide, the communal question, lies only with one community. I mean, the way this book has been written, it has been written in very laudatory terms about Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, his role in talking about Muslims in general, and how he came up with the idea that there should be a separate nation from them. And then going on and discussing a large number of other Muslim leaders. But the sum total is that the Muslims were being discriminated to such an extent that there was no option left but to get the country divided. How would you react to that? And what would you tell the Indian Muslims regarding this question?
ये तो बिल्कुल ही गलत है, इसलिए कि हिंदुओं का राज नहीं था 1947 से पहले, अंग्रेजों का राज था। और अंग्रेजों ने तो अंग्रेजों पर इल्ज़ाम बहुत से लग सकते हैं, लेकिन ये तो नहीं लग सकता कि उन्होंने कोई मुसलमानों के खिलाफ ही खास पॉलिसी रखी हो। हाँ, गदर के बाद कुछ एरियाज में उन्होंने ये पॉलिसी रखी थी, लेकिन किसानों को भी बहुत मारा था। गांव में जाते थे और सब जो जाट किसान थे उनको शूट कर देते थे, मर्दों को। ये तो उनके उसी में है, म्यूटिनी के बाद। तो ऐसा ही नहीं था कि सिर्फ मुसलमानों को इस एरिया के उन्होंने यूपी के एरिया के परेशान किया हो, लेकिन बाद में तो फिर उन्होंने बहुत कंसेशन देना शुरू किया। और ख़ास तौर से उनको ये नज़र आया कि अगर हम मुसलमानों को इनकरेज करें, ख़ास तौर से ज़मींदारों को, और इनको प्रोटेक्शन दें, तो हम नेशनल मूवमेंट को वीकन कर सकते हैं। इसमें वो तैयार। तो इसलिए पूरी स्टोरी के मुसलमानों पे कोई बहुत जुल्म हो रहा था, ये तो बिल्कुल ही गलत। और यूपी और जो कांग्रेस सरकार थी 1937-39 तक, उन्होंने कोई ऐसी बात नहीं की। अंग्रेज तो बिल्कुल थे कि कहीं उनको पर आप जुल्म कर रहे हैं तो फौरन ये इंटरवीन करते, लेकिन कोई ऐसा हुआ भी नहीं। कांग्रेस ने कहा कि चीफ जस्टिस मॉरिस गुहा कि आप इंक्वायरी कर लीजिए अगर हमारी हुकूमत में मुसलमानों पे कोई भी जुल्म हुआ। और जगह उर्दू की तालीम उन्होंने जारी रखी। जाकिर हुसैन साहब का सिलेबस इन्फोर्स किया जो बहुत अच्छा था उर्दू का। तो ये सब तो बिल्कुल गलत है। जहाँ तक सैयद अहमद खां का ताल्लुक है, वो तो ये इमेजिन ही नहीं कर रहे थे कि कोई अलग हिंदुस्तान स्टेट भी होगी और अंग्रेज़ों से कभी अंग्रेज़ों का राज कभी ख़त्म होगा। ना लखनऊ की स्पीच जिसका मैंने ज़िक्र किया है उसमें ये था, बल्कि उन्होंने कहा कि राजपूतों को भी खड़ा होना चाहिए कांग्रेस के खिलाफ। तो इसलिए सिर्फ मुसलमानों को भी अपील नहीं कर रहे थे, बल्कि वो तो एक सब हिंदुस्तानियों को अपील कर रहे थे जो बंगाली ना हो। एक खास तौर से इस पर बहुत एम्फेसाइज कर रहे थे कि बंगाली छा जाएंगे अगर हिंदुस्तान में सिविल सर्विस एग्जामिनेशन हो जाए, जैसे कांग्रेस चाहती है। तो सैयद अहमद खां को ये समझना कि उन्होंने कभी कोई ये सोचा भी होगा कि मुस्लिम नेशन हो सकती है, ये मेरे ख्याल में नहायत ही बेवकूफ़। हाँ, सैयद अहमद खां का तो मैं ज़रूर ये कहूँगा कि उन्होंने बहुत सी हिम्मत की बातें कही जो मुसलमानों को काबिल कबूल अब भी नहीं है, कि बाइबल में कोई तहरीफ नहीं हुई, वर्क ऑफ गॉड और वर्ड ऑफ गॉड को एक होना चाहिए। इसलिए अगर कुरान शरीफ में ऐसी बात है जो काबिल कबूल नहीं है साइंस को, तो हमें दूसरी तरह मतलब देना चाहिए। तो मैं ये समझता हूँ कि ये सब बड़ी ब्रेव चीजें थी जो उन्होंने कही, लेकिन वो एक गलत दूसरा इश्यू ये कि उनका कांग्रेस को उन्होंने अपोज किया इसलिए कि पाकिस्तान बने तो फंटास्टिक, तो बिल्कुल ही इस बात है। और उन्होंने लखनऊ की तकरीर में भी राजपूतों को खास तौर से अपील की जो जाहिर मुसलमान नहीं। तो मैंने तो उनकी तकरीर का इसीलिए भी किया कि वो पहला शॉट था जो मुस्लिम साइड से हुआ। इनका ये मतलब नहीं है कि सैयद अहमद खान कहीं कोई इमेजिन भी कर रहे थे कि पाकिस्तान जैसी चीज हो सकती है, मुसलमान हिंदुओं में झगड़ा हो।
Right, sir. Let us now have a few questions from the audience. And one of the first questions to be put up, Ali Haider. Pakistani historian Khurshid Kamal Aziz had written a book titled Muslims Under Congress Rule 1937-39, in which he tried to show that Congress was also communal to Muslims after 1937 Indian provincial elections. So, do you think this accusation is true? That mistreatment of Muslims after 1937 became the catalyst for Pakistan movement? Congress also denied coalition with League in UP. Your reaction, sir?
You see, this was a mistake, and as far as the coalition is concerned, even a pro-Hindu Mahasabha historian, R.C. Majumdar, says it was a mistake. That in UP, the coalition with Muslim League should have been noted. And I think if even R.C. Majumdar is of that opinion, then I think that the mistake should be acknowledged. And Abul Kalam Azad has also treated it as a mistake. But to extend it to show, to say that Muslims were treated when there were two Muslim ministers, cabinet ministers in the cabinet of 6 in UP. Muslims are 15% of the population. In the ministry, they got 30% seats. And that also very important ministries. Shows that actually this is a total error. And at that time, I have not read this book, but actually this must be drawing on Pirpur report and other publications which the Muslim League published, in which there were totally false statements. If the very fact that Hindi should be used, that was actually treated as an insult to Muslims. I mean, as if although in the Congress governments, Urdu was continuously used. Actually, my own school, AMU school, shifted from English to Urdu because the UP government said that Urdu should be the mother tongue should be used. And we had that Zakir Hussain syllabus for us. As I say, Congress offered that if you have any complaints, Maurice Goar, the Chief Justice of India, should be made the arbiter. But the Muslim League rejected this compromise. Then there was a provision in Act of 1935 that governors would be specially charged with protection of minorities. No governor, no British governor ever intervened and said that the Congress government has done this against Muslims, when they were actually on the lookout to intervene. Therefore, as far as facts are concerned, this is totally wrong. There's no truth in the matter.
The next question is by Hasnain Aziz. Sir, Allama Iqbal called Emperor Aurangzeb as father of Muslim nationalism, and Hindu nationalists called Shivaji as father of Hindu nationalism. So, would it be correct to say that communal politics in India started?
Well, actually, Aurangzeb certainly was intolerant, and he altered the religious policy of his ancestors to a certain extent. As far as Shivaji is concerned, I don't think he had anything to do with Hindu nationalism. Poor man wanted to be a Raja, and therefore he claimed a Rajput birth. He was not satisfied with his Hindu birth. A Pandit in Banaras, then so actually Maratha nationalism is also shaken by the fact that Shivaji didn't want simply to be treated as a Maratha but as a Sisodiya Rajput. In fact, whatever you may say of Shivaji, but he never persecuted Muslims. There's not a single case of his doing it. In fact, it is said that in the Maratha tradition, that Maratha soldiers ransacked the Durga, and Shivaji was very annoyed, and actually he fell ill, and his death was attributed to the curse of the Pir by the Marathas. So actually this was the kind of spirit. And if you take even the Peshwas, then they maintained mosques, village accounts, so that this kind of belief of communalism was not present at that time because the polity was different. Yes, religious orthodoxy, yes, that is Aurangzeb. But Aurangzeb had no idea that Muslim community would rule India. He would rule India. So this present situation, communalism in this sense is a very modern phenomena like nationalism.
Right, sir.
When
there is a question by Mehru Jafar. Mehru Jafar says, Adab, Professor Habib, what is the one most important lesson for the present day Indian Muslim as a takeaway from the Indian national movement and the communal question of the past?
Well, I have no particular reason why an Indian Muslim should have a different view from a non-Muslim Indian. If there is discrimination against Muslims, then it should affect all Indians, not only Muslims. Just as if there is any discrimination or persecution of scheduled castes or Dalits, it should affect all of us, not simply Dalits. So, first of all, any communal domination, communal approach as present adopted is a matter of concern for all Indians, not only Muslims. Muslims are repressed. That is for all.
Let us have the question of Ajay Sharma ji. It's truth majority of Muslims in India were not granted voting rights at time of 1946 elections due to qualifications of separate electorate. So only 10% voted for Pakistan. Many Muslims didn't like the idea of Pakistan floated by Jinnah and Muslim League. This study has been done by Dr. Shamsul Islam of University of Delhi. only Ashrafs were in favor of Pakistan, a mistake and useless idea of nation based on religion which failed miserably. Pakistan has now become a hub of international. I can't see. Probably he means that
Well,
it's a failed.
you see, this is not entirely true because there were two electorates in 1945-46 elections. One for Central Assembly, which was only limited to 2.5% of the population. But for the Provincial Assembly, the electorate was much larger because it was based on the Act of 1935, whereas the Central Assembly electorate was based on the 1919 Act of 1919. So clearly, the larger electorate included not only Ashraf but also Arazil, a considerable number of artisans, considerable number of peasants were included in the electorate. Therefore, it is not true that only Ashraf voted. In fact, one might argue that perhaps among Ashraf, the Congress influence was greater because what had happened in 1945 was the large use of religious men, Maulvis and Sufis by the Muslim League. Whereas they said that if you don't vote for Muslim League, you won't be Muslims. Therefore, I doubt, and I was myself one of in age of 16, so I knew what was being talked about. So there is no doubt that the votes cast represented the general feeling of Muslims at that time. Whereas in 1937 elections, where also the same kind of electorate was, Muslim League had got very few votes. And in fact, if Congress had put up more candidates, they would probably have won in 1937.
Right, sir. There is a question by Shamoon Ahmad. Uh, uh, Sir, do you think that uh, unity of 1857 was eye-opener for the British? They changed their course of action by dividing Indian caste on communal basis, communal electorate, etc.
Well, you see,
The
when
policy of divide and rule.
the rebellion was suppressed in 1857, first of all, one must remember uh, the rebellion uh, involved Hindustani speaking areas. They didn't involve other areas. And therefore, the policy against Muslims, or actually vigilance against Muslims, operated only in early. It was not a general Indian policy of the British government. Naturally, when Indians began to fight on communal lines, the British um, used them for their own purposes. For instance, they used the word Hindu Congress from 1920s onwards whenever it suited them, not Indian National Congress. You can see it in their government documents. So clearly they made use of infighting between Hindus and Muslims, but that had little to do with their experience of the mutiny in 1857.
Right, sir. There is a question by Muhammad Aftab Alam. Muhammad Aftab Alam asks, sir, in your opinion, what was the probable factor responsible for failure of Rajagopalachari formula or CR plan, a last-ditch effort to avoid unfortunate partition?
No, Jinnah rejected it, although the Pakistan he got was according to the CR formula, but he rejected it in 1944.
All right, sir. There is a question by Dr. Sayyid Ali Kazim. Adab sir, I want to ask as why Marxist like Maulana Bhasani supported the Pakistan resolution, whereas some of the topmost sectarian men like Maulana Mahmudul Hasan and Madani went towards Congress. Their writings smack of anti-Shia attitude. I have seen copies of Al Jamiyat where where they would fire all cylinders against the Shias.
Well, I don't think the Shia Sunni question had anything to do with partition. Jinnah was a Shia himself, although he was not a practicing Muslim in the fact that he never prayed 5 times a day. But the Muslim League made use of both Sunni and Shia religious divines. A large number of Shias certainly, but and then also other sects of Muslims. So clearly, there was no effect of Shia-Sunni dispute on Pakistan. Although it is said now that many Pakistanis are shocked when they are told that Qaid-e-Azam or Jinnah was a Shia. But that was a fact.
Sir, just one, probably the last question, although there are many more left, but I'll take up one that is by Mirza Hasnain. Sir, why Communist Party supported Pakistan? Was it to support them from class struggle or to support Muslims? Also, do you think creation of Pakistan was any different from other countries created in the name of religious nationalism like Alawite state and Druze state created for Alawites and Druze by French in Syria, or Israel created for Jews by Britain?
You see, there is a difference in that. Certainly, the Israel has been created by migration. There have been divisions of states or within states among religions, but as far as Pakistan was concerned, it was created on religious grounds, supposedly religious grounds, communal grounds. In the last stage, religion was particularly used by denouncing Muslims who were not supporters of Pakistan. It is true that Adhikari, a communist leader, wrote in favor of Pakistan, but within India. That is to say, it would be an autonomous area within India. So this was not actually supporting the partition. And then it was finally given up, and there was a critique of Pakistan written by R.P. Dutt in India Today, published in 1945-46, the Bombay edition, which was then accepted by the Communist Party. So towards the end, they rejected the demand for partition.
Right, sir. I mean, it's 1.5 hours. There are many comments, excellent. But there's one question, sir, which I would insist that you take up. Anand Bakshi Chakma Sir, please say something on Sohrawardi's plan of undivided independent Bengal in 1947.
You see, this Sohrawardi's plan just came too late. It came, you see, he was Premier of Bengal, and of course on August 15 he lost that position because Bengal got divided. It was around that time that in Calcutta he played a very good part in stopping the riots, and he remained in India for quite some time after partition when he tried to do this. So this was after the passage of India Independence Act by British Parliament. This kind of thing would have required acceptance by both Indian and Pakistan governments. And the real thing was that there was no support for it either in East Bengal or West Bengal. No popular support, no large meeting could take place, for instance, where a united Bengal was proclaimed. So, unfortunately, or fortunately, however one might look at it, Sohrawardi's plan failed. And then he went to Pakistan, became an important politician in Pakistan, and in several matters he played a very good part, like defending the communist accused in the conspiracy case.
थैंक यू सर. साथियों, आज हम लोगों ने प्रोफेसर इरफान हबीब साहब को एक बहुत ही रिलेवेंट इशू पे हम लोगों ने सुना. ये एक बर्निंग का इशू है जिस पे आज इरफान साहब ने रोशनी डाली, और हम लोगों को जाहिर है कि सबक भी सीखना चाहिए बीइंग सिटीजन्स ऑफ इंडिया. मैं बहुत से उन लोगों से भी ये कहना चाहूँगा जो यहाँ पे आज ज्वाइन किए हुए हैं, और सर फॉर्चुनेटली जिन लोगों ने आज ज्वाइन किया उसमें हिंदुस्तानी, पाकिस्तानी दोनों इसमें आज शामिल हुए आपके लेक्चर में. there were number of Pakistani scholars also who had joined your lecture, and I'm really thankful to them कि वो आए और उन्होंने हम लोगों की बात सुनी. मैं हिस्टोरियंस जितने भी यहाँ जमा हुए हैं उनसे भी ये कहना चाहता हूँ कि जो एक क्रिटिकल अप्रोच जो एक हिस्ट्री की तरफ हम लोगों की होना चाहिए, जो शायद आजकल मॉडर्न डिकेड्स में कुछ कम होती चली जा रही है, और हम लोग हिस्ट्री को हिज स्टोरी की तरह इस्तेमाल करने लगे हैं, और मनगढ़ंत कहानियां रोज के रोज हमारे सामने मिथ्स आती हैं, और मिथ्स पे बेस करके हम अवाम को के सामने जाते हैं और भड़काऊबाजी करते हैं. आई थिंक एज हिस्टोरियंस हमारा आपका फर्ज है कि हम न सिर्फ ये कि एक हिस्टोरिकल रिगर से अपने सोर्सेस को देखें, समझें, बल्कि एक दूसरा बहुत बड़ा फर्ज हम पे और आप पे है, वो ये है कि जो रिसर्चेस हम करें, जो बात हम करें, वो मंजर-ए-आम पे लाएं, पब्लिक तक पहुंचाएं. और ये जो लेक्चर सीरीज जो हम लोगों की चल रही है, जो पिछले साल से है, इसका सिर्फ एक ही मकसद था, और ये मकसद ये था कि किसी सूरत से जो पिछले तकरीबन 10 साल से जो हिस्ट्री पे एक चोट की जा रही है और उसको माइथोलॉजी में तब्दील किया जा रहा है, और बार बार उसमें मजहब की आमेजिश की जा रही है, इन दोनों पहलुओं से अवाम को उजागर करें. जो रिसर्चेस हिस्ट्री में हुई हैं, जो प्राइमरी सोर्सेस पे बेस करके हुई हैं, उनको आपके सामने रखें, और आप बगैर तथ्यों की कोई बात हम न करें. इसमें जो भी शामिल होते हैं, हर एक को इजाजत है, आप चाहे क्रिटिकल सवाल पूछिए, चाहे आप फेवर का सवाल पूछिए, हर एक को इजाजत है कि आप अपने डाउट्स हमारे इस प्रोग्राम में आके आप क्लियर कर सकते हैं. और आज काफी लोगों ने इरफान साहब से सवाल भी पूछे, और मैं आपसे वादा करता हूं कि जो लोग अगर किन्हीं लोगों के सवाल बच गए हैं, तो वी विल try to pass them on to Professor Irfan Habib, and surely we would try to take an answer from him regarding your queries. पिछले साल, जैसे मैंने शुरू में कहा था, कि हम लोग सिर्फ मिडिवल इंडिया के ऊपर कन्फाइंड रहे थे, लेकिन इस बार जब हम लोगों ने अपना सीजन 2 को शुरू किया है, तो इस बार हमने 2 चेंजेस किए हैं। एक, क्योंकि बार बार ये एक डिमांड आ रही थी कि सिर्फ अंग्रेजी में करने से ज्यादा फायदा नहीं पहुंच रहा है, क्योंकि जो पढ़े लिखे ऑलरेडी हैं उस लेवल के, जो अंग्रेजी मीडियम के पढ़े हुए हैं, वो ऑलरेडी बातों को जानते हैं। अवाम तक पहुंचने के लिए हमें अवाम की जबान का इस्तेमाल करना पड़ेगा, एंड दैट इज वाई आपने देखा होगा कि ये जो 6-7 लेक्चर्स इस सीजन में हमारे हुए हैं, उसमें कुछ तो अंग्रेजी में रहे, लेकिन ज्यादातर में हमने ये कोशिश की है कि उसको हिंदुस्तानी या कम से कम मिक्स्ड लैंग्वेज में आपके सामने उसको पेश करें, ताकि वो बातें अवाम तक पहुंच सके। ये यूट्यूब पे जाता है, जहाँ सेव होता है, और जब चाहे आप इसको सुन सकते हैं। हमसे आप ये भी सजेस्ट कर सकते हैं कि क्या आपके सामने किस टॉपिक्स पे हम लेक्चर्स करवाएं। जैसे मैंने कहा था कि इस बार हम मॉडर्न इंडिया और एंशिएंट इंडिया पे भी जोर देंगे और स्कॉलर्स को बुलाएंगे, और आपके सामने उन टॉपिक्स को भी हम लोग डिस्कस करेंगे। बिल्कुल आखिर में मैं शगुफ्ता सिद्दी, जो गंगा जमनी हेरिटेज की हैं और जो हमारे एक तरीके से साथी हैं, जो इस प्रोग्राम को करने में जो हमारी मदद करती हैं, आई विल रिक्वेस्ट हर टू थैंक प्रोफेसर इरफान हबीब एट द एंड।
बहुत लंबा हो गया,
आपका माइक बंद है।
Thank you so much, sir. Without taking much time, I would like to thank Professor Irfan Habib for accepting this request and being with us and guiding us throughout. Look forward to more sessions with you. And thank you again for talking on such an important issue that's so relevant to our lives. With these words, I want to say good night to all of you. Please join us again next Saturday at 7 p.m. Good night, everyone. Please take care.
Good night.